On my part, it just had to take a lot of trust to be willing to take that risk and to move out of what was comfortable and what was normal for us. And to, like he was saying earlier, just to take a big leap of faith and just to even like trust the vision that was in my husband's heart, to just go ahead and do it and not just be stuck doing the same thing we've always done, because there were big dreams in our hearts and we wanted to impact a lot of people. But I knew that there is also a time in the beginning where you're laying the foundation and there was sacrifices that you had to make as well.
Welcome to The In Factor, Conversations with Entrepreneurs. I'm Rebecca White, and my guest on today's show is Troy Bravenboer. Troy is president of Brave Freight, a company he started 10 years ago after spending several years in sales. This business is a premier motor carrier organization that offers unique opportunities for both its drivers and shippers. More recently, Troy helped to start Dawn TMS, an innovative tech-enabled company that supports the business side of running a freight company. Listen in as we talk about the importance today and future of freight and logistics and the lessons Troy has learned thus far in his entrepreneurial journey. Plus, we had a special guest appearance by his partner in life, Sarah, who shared more about the impact on family and the importance of trust for entrepreneurial support and success. So, Troy, thank you for joining me on The In Factor today.
Yeah, this is a pleasure. Thank you so much.
So I'm so excited. I think you reached out to me maybe a few months ago and reconnected, and I'm really excited to hear more about what's up with you and with Brave Freight and all of that. But before we do that, let's back it up a little bit and talk about a little bit about how you got to where you are today. So what's your entrepreneurial journey looked like to getting you to 2023? I think 10 years into, is it 10 years into Brave Freight?
Yep, 10 years this March.
Yeah. So let's talk about how you got there, how you got here.
Yeah, for sure. And it's so exciting too, because I definitely want to shout out UT and everything that you're doing at the Loth Entrepreneur Center, because it actually was a very critical engagement when we got accepted into your entrepreneurial program that really changed the trajectory for everything that we're doing. So, real quick, just to kind of recap, I know that you're, I believe, the dean, right, of the entrepreneurial school, and but I am a college dropout. I just have to confess. And so
okay.
I dropped out of college, but I knew that I had a heart for business, and I ended up getting in door-to-door sales. I moved down to Tampa, Florida. Actually went to a Bible college here, and while I was at this ministry school, I did door-to-door sales, and I just really seemed to flourish at door-to-door sales. And I did that for that's when Verizon Fios first came out, the fiber optic phone, internet, TV, and went door-to-door and sold that, and had a really great time just learning the grind of sales and learning how to serve customers and learning how to break preoccupation. And every entrepreneur has to learn how to do sales in some fashion or another. And so we did door-to-door for several years, went to work for a company called Vivint and did that door-to-door for several summers. And it was a really good summer opportunity while I was in school. And but nobody grows up and wants to be a door-to-door salesman when they're older. It's not like the career day choice, of teenagers. And I just wanted to have my own business, and I wanted to have something that would allow me to travel while I had my own business. And just through some serendipitous events, I was at a wedding in Missouri and had breakfast with my wife's mutual friend of ours. And he's like, hang on a second, let me finish some of my work with my business. And immediately I was like, man, what allows him to travel and have his own business at the same time? He was doing some nonprofit work, and it ended up being a trucking company. And it was the right investment point. It was the right lifestyle. It was just like all the things that I was looking for, and really just kind of took a step out of faith and just started learning everything I could about trucking, like not knowing anything. Like I looked at rust bucket trucks, but I just looked at them just to kind of, just to start doing something, and I got involved in trucking in 2012. I started learning about it. 2013, we started the company, and started building from there and just kind of growing and going.
Yeah. So did you always know you wanted to be an entrepreneur, or was this just a natural progression? And by the way, thank you for the shout out. It was a delight to have you and your team in our program a few years ago. And And you're exactly the kind of company that we love having on campus because you're such great role models for our students. So,
Thank you.
you
Yeah.
know,
Yeah.
you mentioned that you did sales, and sales is so critical. But is it sales that launched you into business ownership, or has this been something that you always wanted to do?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, I just think back as a childhood, I had a pretty quote unquote normal childhood, right? Like I didn't really have many jobs. I always wanted to make money as a kid. I remember being in fifth grade, like reading John Grisham books and being like, oh, lawyers make a ton of money. I want to be a lawyer to make a lot of money. But then I kind of went in, and when I was at college, I was in school for graphic design and industrial design. It was a passion. I enjoyed it. I liked it, but I just also realized that I didn't want to have to design and create because of somebody else's strong hand on my life. I wanted to design and create because it was what I wanted to do. And I actually got involved in a network marketing company at that time, and it just broke my brain. Like financial freedom became an option. Like I thought it was just like this gift that was bestowed upon the fortunate in life, and I didn't realize that it was something that people could intentionally strive for. And like I just started to realize, like if other people could do it, then I could do it, right? And you can't determine the direction of the wind, but you can determine the set of your sails. And I realized that no matter what was happening in life, that I could change my sail to direct the wind to help project me in the way that I wanted to go. And that if other people could do it, then surely I could do it too. People put their pants on one leg at a time, as the saying goes. And I just realized that like I was going to be working for the next 20, 30, 40 years of my life. And if I was going to be working anyway, then I might as well be doing something that was going to be the most benefit to me and my future family at that time, and also to potentially help as many other people as possible. And it was like, so that was like this idea of working for profits instead of wages, that I could be better at something than somebody else and make more than them just by being better at it. I was a hard worker, that's for sure. I was a hard worker. So I'm like, all right, let me do that. And that's kind of how it got into sales. And then, sales is still just directly related to your general output, unless you're some type of manager that gets paid overrides or whatever the case is. And I just realized that I wanted to have an asset out of my work and not just have a job, right? And that's where like the idea of like business ownership came, because it's like, okay, cool, I can build something that actually has like asset value that I can then own at that point. And just kind of that progression of, I don't know, success mindset, I guess you could say, just like learning and growing. And that's what got me like just hungry to be a business owner, was like, hey, I want freedom in my life. I want to build something that lasts, something that I can give to my kids and change I didn't just want to make a lot of money. It was about more than that.
Mm-hmm. Now I think you mentioned your wife at the time so you were married when you took this step out of work, or were you on your way to being married?
Yeah, I was
Yeah.
married. She's here laughing at me. She has a headset on. Here, come poke your head in real quick and say hi real fast. This will be a fun little treat. She's beautiful.
There's
She's way better than I am. So
Hi, how are you? So I'm about to ask him a question about, what your response was. What was your wife's response when you
here,
said,
go ahead.
"Hey,
Hop
I'm
in.
gonna," yeah, come on
This
and
is a little
join us
treat.
because,
We didn't plan on this.
yeah, I mean,
So, so I
it
was
can be
married.
really
Yeah,
tough.
I was. We were in door to door, and we'd been married. We got married in November of 2011. So I did another summer in 2012, but it was in 2012. So we were only married for almost 1 year before we felt this. So go ahead. Why don't you share from your perspective a little bit, babe?
On my part, it just had to take a lot of trust to be willing to take that risk and to move out of what was comfortable and what was normal for us. And to, like he was saying earlier, just to take a big leap of faith and just to even like trust the vision that was in my husband's heart, to just go ahead and do it and not just be stuck doing the same thing we've always done, because there were big dreams in our hearts and we wanted to impact a lot of people. But I knew that there is also a time in the beginning where you're laying the foundation and there was sacrifices that you had to make as well, especially because at the time I was pregnant with my son as well. So
Oh boy.
that was a big thing. But I mean, we pulled through. Like, I felt peace about it.
Yeah, and she really trusted me, like I think that I had a little bit of a track record with having some success in sales. Like I did relatively well in that, and when you're doing door to door, it's 100% commission. It's a great sandbox to test yourself, and test your mentality. Door to door sales is like, it's like all reward, no risk. And the fact that like, you don't have to lay out any money to generate capital. And it's like, if you can make it happen in that space, then, kind of whatever else maybe you step into, there's a higher likelihood that you'll have success. So, I was in the top 1% of sales in that company. And so she had a little bit of trust that I could maybe make it happen, I think, but it was still like, a step of faith, it was still like, you have to follow the dream that's in your heart.
Yeah, and I'm so glad. I'm so glad. What's your wife's name?
Sarah.
Sarah. I'm so glad Sarah joined us because I agree. I'm guessing it's been a journey that you've made together just by watching you and Sarah talking, and a lot of people. A lot of people are really a lot of couples really struggle. It puts a lot of pressure and stress on a marriage sometimes, and on relationships. So, while we have Sarah, I'm really curious. How have you been a part of the company? Have you worked in the company or been? I know you've been supportive, but tell us
I
about
tried
how.
getting her to do my books for about 4 years, and then I realized that was a futile effort and it wasn't going to happen. So,
Well, honestly, I'm a young mother of 3 kids, 7 and under. So I think at the
You've got a
time
lot of
too,
work at home.
yeah.
yeah, totally.
So I had to try to juggle that, while also at the beginnings of the business. And, we're both learning as we go at this point.
Yeah, I think the main thing
Sure.
too for us is like we kept our overhead low, like we really tried to live
Mhm.
below our means, and which is not really a popular idea amongst like entrepreneurs that want a lifestyle and the watch and the car and the everything else. Like we really just tried to live below our means.
Mhm.
And I tried, and then like the one thing that we did was we learned to pay myself as an employee for the role that I was performing before we would hire out for that role. So, basically it's like, hey, if I could afford myself in a salary of that role, then I could afford to hire somebody else within that role and still grow a profitable company to be able to do it. So we did everything bootstrapped. Like we have a SaaS now that we're building. Like I know we engage within Brave Freight, but we just changed our membership open to our software, our trucking SaaS. It's a TMS, and it's like we've done the bootstrap thing. Like we know what that's like for our companies. We've done that before, and I think that it's really powerful as a founder to be able to build a bootstrap business and to know what it's like to have to squeeze every single dollar. Squeeze George Washington till he cries. It's
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
you have to do that, and I think a lot of founders don't realize that. But Sarah was very supportive through the process, and it was really nice. Like it's not to be overly traditional, but like it was really nice to be able to be at my desk and have breakfast brought to me when I was working home, or like to know that a meal was made. And like those are not undermined things. Like I think that sometimes society like undervalues those things. And it's like we know our lane and we stay within our
Mhm.
lane. And Sarah's lane was not balancing books, was not receiving payments, but it was being a loving, supporting spouse that was encouraging, that believed in me, and that
Yeah.
spoke positive over my life. And I could just go out there and face the wind and the waves every day, knowing that I had agreement from my spouse.
Yeah, yeah. That safety net is so important because it's hard. It's hard to be an entrepreneur, but it's also hard to have a young family and have faith sometimes that things are going to work out when
We
when there are struggles, which there always
We've had
are
a
along
friend
the
of
way.
ours now that's like, it's tough. I was just talking to him last night at an event, and they had like a handful of miscarriages last year. And I don't know why we're going here, but we're going here, right? And it's like I mean, this is real life, right? Like there's
It's
people that
life.
are out
That's
there right
right.
now that this is what it is.
Yeah.
Like just because you're an entrepreneur doesn't mean that you don't
Yeah.
still deal with family and life, and he's had a handful of miscarriages last year with his wife, and he's full time in his business. They did a seed round, so they raised enough to be able to help him to be able to work. But like, he confided in me, he's like, man, my like marriage is really taking a toll right now. He's like, how did you do it? Like, I'm like, man, we have a date day every night, every week.
Yeah.
We have a date day every week. We set time aside, even if we love our young kids that aren't a lot of work, we still have a date day, just us. And, we try to go out on a small trip every year. Like we're here in Tampa together, and we have family watching our kids over in Texas. So it's a short little 3-day trip that we get now for ourselves. And, yeah, there's different financial flexibility that people have depending on where they're at in their company. But I think that there's something to be said about prioritizing your family. And I think I'm the director of a business ministry for a church in Fort Worth. And, I believe that businesses should have the strongest marriages. And for too long, marriages and family relationships have been like sacrificed in these, alpha man type that sacrifice their family. And it shouldn't be that way. Entrepreneurs and business people should have the strongest relationships. They should have the best relationships with their kids. Their kids should believe that anything is possible because they see their dad and their mom doing anything and everything. And that really really needs to be the priority for entrepreneurs, and everything else comes secondary.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I'm glad you shared that because you're right. I mean, entrepreneurs and running a business, we're all people at the end of the day. We're humans, and we're navigating life and families and relationships, and it's so important to have people on our side. Have a team on our side, and not just the people that we work with, but the people that we can spend a little time away from our business because it's hard to do that. It's hard to find that time.
Yeah, totally.
So,
100%
yeah.
agreed.
So it's great. It's actually a delight to have Sarah join us. So I'm so glad that
Thanks.
she
I was
was.
a little surprised. She came
Yeah,
just
I'm glad she was
to
able to
support
do
me
that.
again. And the idea
Yeah.
of support, she's here with a headset on listening to me talk to you. And
It's
then,
part of the process. So I would like to talk a little bit. Let's
Sure.
talk a little bit about Brave Freight. And now, is it Dawn? I think
Dawn.
Dawn.
Like making
Yeah.
Dawn, DAWN. Yep.
DAWN. So Dawn TMS. So let's tell us about Brave Freight. What does Brave Freight do in the transportation space, and then what how are you impacting the industry? I think with this new, we hope with this new company, right?
Yeah. So the vision of Brave Freight is to provide owner operators and fleet owners with a simple turnkey solution to a scalable trucking company. So that's our vision, and really what that means and what trucking is. So right now in the trucking space, there's 1.1 million trucking companies, and the gross revenue in the trucking space is about $800 billion a year. So it's a ton of money. And 99.7 of those 1.1 million companies have less than 100 trucks on them. And of that 1.1 million, less than or more than 95% of them have less than 20 trucks. So a huge majority of these trucking companies out there are actually SMB companies, like small to medium sized business companies that's out there. And it's such like an Americana type of company. Like when you get out there and you see like the truckers, like I've been to truck stops, we used to go door to door recruiting because door to door is my experience, right? So when I started building my company, I built these little flyers and went door to door at truck stops. I did what I knew how to do and just brought it into my business. And like, it's such an Americana business where you're out there with these people, but they're very blue collared workers and they're not very tech savvy and they're like business owners, but they're business owners just by LLC, class, not really because of how they run their business. So what we've done and kind of how it's grown over the years is Brave Freight is really turned into what we call a carrier incubator. So we take on these owner operators that have an entrepreneurial mindset and they want to grow their business. And so being a carrier is like being your own trucking company. That's what they call trucking companies, as carriers. That's the authority they get with the government. So the idea is that we put them on a 6 to 24 month like incubator course, and we incubate them for a 6 to 24 month period and help prepare them to be their own trucking company. And we support them and show them all what it is. And it ended up last year, we actually started a sister company that's like a fractional carrier management company. So it basically does everything that we do for Brave Freight, but it does it as a service provider for these newly incubated businesses that have essentially graduated through our program. So it's like, cool, I'm a guy that I just started my own business. I still don't know how to do all this stuff. Well, that's okay. We have a service company that can do done for you, done with you, or do it yourself type of coaching, and we can walk you through that. So it's kind of like this progressionary business. And then the software that we've built, there's really not a lot of software for trucking companies. It's like a fax machine kind of industry. Except for the fact that fax machines probably will eventually get outdated. Trucks won't. And, there's just not a lot of innovation in this space. And the people that are innovating, it's like slow. Like I was just talking to an investor today at Embark who does more like Series A and Series B. And I was telling him how a lot of these factoring companies that purchase these invoices, like they don't even have two-way API integrations for you to be able to like integrate with their platform and send data back and forth. And he was like, his mind was blown and just some of the different things. So the industry itself is very antiquated from the software standpoint. And we've built a software that at its core is what we call a load management software. So what I did was I said, hey, what is the core of every single shipment? Well, the core of every single shipment is the actual shipment, right? It's the load that moves from point A to point B. And when you can capture the data of point A to point B, you now have the heart of that business, right? So for instance, even though we might only charge $50 or $60 a month for our service, we know that every truck that we do on average will do $250,000 a year on volume. And of that $250,000 a year of volume, because we have a carrier company, we know that that truck is going to spend 40 to 60% of its expenses on some type of vendor necessity that they need to be in the industry. So when you hold the nucleus of it, which is the load, you can start to cannibalize these other parts of that $250,000. You know their revenue, you know who their customers are, you know whether their customers pay or whether their customer doesn't pay. So all of that data comes in, and we can now start to grow our business by offering them services that integrate with our platform. And then the benefit to that trucker is, I know this is a mouthful, but now what we get to do is we get to serve that truck driver better, because we get to start to quantify gaps or areas that they can then improve their business, right? We can start to see, hey, you're spending this much on fuel and you're driving this amount of miles. Did you know that people that have your same year, make, and model of vehicle are getting this mile to the gallon? So where can we help you with that, or whatever the case is? So we're having like this data layer that's actually making data like usable to a blue collar worker, and we're doing it in like a super user friendly way for them.
So you benchmark what they're doing against all the data that comes into your system, and then you can find ways to help them improve. That is so brilliant. I love it. Now, I'm curious, Troy, because I don't know a whole lot about the trucking industry, but were there other incubators like this out there? Were there other groups that were helping independent owner-operators kind of figure things out?
So we're like not the only ones for sure, but like we're the only ones that don't look like they're from Windows 98.
Yeah. So innovation has been one of the things that you've brought to the industry. And now you mentioned that you found out about this. Did you say at a wedding?
Yeah, so I was at a wedding in Missouri, and again, my heart, I'm in door-to-door sales, don't want to be in it forever, and like, man, I want to have my own business, and I went to a breakfast in Springfield. Me and my wife have a mutual friend who was actually doing some traveling ministry and doing these big tent crusades up in Missouri. And it was an hour away. We were living in Florida. He's from Texas. And we're like, heck, an hour away in Missouri is a whole lot closer than Florida and Texas. Let's drive out and have breakfast with him. So yeah, he's plinking away at his computer and like, hang on a second, let me finish with my business. And immediately I was like, man, what allows him to travel for his nonprofit work and have a business at the exact same time? Because that was my heart, is to be able to have a nonprofit, to be able to serve people and have a business where I didn't need to pull a paycheck from my nonprofit, right? And I'm like, oh, what is this? And it was like trucking. And it's like, it's those conversations that you have with people, and as they speak, it's like on the inside, it's like, it's like Mexican jumping beans going off on the inside. You're like, ooh, yeah. Oh, that's right. That feels good. And, I just kind of took that information, felt good. And then, when I came back to Florida after that wedding, I just was like, who do I know that knows anything about trucking? I'm a network person by nature, and I learn from other people. So it was like immediately, it was like, okay, who can I talk to that knows anything about this? Because that's how I'm going to learn. And that's how I started.
And so when you started digging in and learning about the industry, you were looking for gaps and ways that you might be able to
really, when
innovation.
I first started out, Dr. White, I was really just looking for how are other people doing it and doing it successfully, quite frankly, because I didn't know anything about it. And I didn't, I feel like that's one thing I could say, like, if I can offer like a bit of advice to early stage companies, it's like, yes, do we want to disrupt the world? Absolutely. Should you let that passion, go out? Never. But like sometimes when you come into industry, there's nothing wrong with finding out how other people are doing it and getting started in a similar way and finding out how to be profitable. Because I think in immaturity, a lot of times we come in and we're like, we're going to turn this city upside down. We're going to turn this industry upside down. And then you realize that the people who have been doing it for 20 years have forgotten more than you've ever learned. And it's like, there's something to be said about, just staying humble, getting in an industry, learning about how it's done. And maybe there's a reason why it's not done that innovative way that you think you need to do it, because somebody, and again, I'm not saying that they have thought about it, but it's worth it sometimes to just get in, find what works and what is profitable. And like, that's how we took our carrier company to 7 figures in 3 years after a chain. We got in and we did it 2 years and we're like, man, there's got to be a better way. And then we found a better way. And that allowed us to take it. We totally restructured our trucking company. We took it to 7 figures in 2.5 years. And then we took it to 8 figures a year in the next 3 years. But it all started from this foundation of just learning and being in the business. So I would say it's like, we came in with big personal dreams, but we also realized that we needed to stay humble and teachable. And we realized that we need to learn what works as a basis. And then when you learn what works as a basis, then you can make your little tweaks off of that basis and find out what's really effective. If not, you might have had a great idea, but you didn't have the other foundational elements right. And, the whole thing gets shot in the foot because you didn't start out, in a profitable manner.
Yeah, I think that's really great advice. There's so much to learn, and when you can stay humble and always focus on learning, I think it's a real advantage as an entrepreneur, because
100%.
I've met a lot of entrepreneurs who become convinced pretty early that they have the answer and solution to everything, and especially I can imagine in the transportation and trucking industry, there's a lot of there would be a lot of challenge to come in and be overly arrogant, and so good for you. Now, I have a question for you about the whole industry of trucking and transportation. Is it challenging these days? I mean, is the industry challenged with finding enough truckers? Because it's a career that's been around for a long time, but you mentioned earlier it's not necessarily a glamorous one, although it's one many people love and make a lot of money with. But is there a problem with our people going into our younger people going into this industry?
Yeah, that's a good question, right? And, for ever since I've been in the industry, they've touted the idea that there's a trucker shortage. And, just my macroeconomic mind is like, okay, if there's a shortage of truckers, what would that mean to the rates, right? Supply and demand would mean, man, there must be a ton of money in here, because if there's a shortage, then there's got to be a ton of money pouring in, right? That's just how supply and demand works, right? And we found that not necessarily to be the case. I mean, people have been touting this like driver shortage horn for years. And really we saw COVID, we actually saw a little bit of pullback in like the initial months of COVID. And there was still money to be made because, I mean, I got actually, being in Embark, I see these really flashy and sexy companies doing really cool stuff. And I'm like, I'm just this trucking guy, you know what I mean? And then COVID happened. I'm like, man, I'm this trucking guy. Like trucking ain't going nowhere, like it is a core industry. But it was, it was like, so we really boomed like 2020, 2021, early part of 2022. And then really when the war in Ukraine happened and there started to be some fear that was in the market, like if you remember 2020, 2021, people were buying things they didn't need because they knew they had to wait 7 to 8 months because of the supply chain to be able to get them.
Sure.
And when there's a lot of freedom in the market and bullish thoughts on it, they don't mind. Like, yeah, I'll buy something I don't need because I don't want to wait when it comes and I'd rather buy it now. But the second that war happened, I think there was a psychology shift, and then people started seeing like fuel pricing going up, and people are like, well, I'm not going to get it if I buy it now. I'm going to wait 6 to 8 months because of the supply chain problems. And then do I really need it? Nah, I don't really need it. So I think people started spending less money. So I think overall freight volumes right now, we use an amazing software. I'll shout out Craig Fuller and what the team does over at Freight Waves. They have an amazing platform called Sonar. And the volumes that are actually going out right now are actually pre-pandemic and like early pandemic. The overall volume of freight that's moving right now is actually less than it was in early pandemic. So that just shows that like the initial sentiment of the American people is not buying stuff right now. Mm-hmm. And, I always feel like you look at like leading and lagging measures, and I feel like, logistics and trucking transportation is a leading metric for what's happening in the American economy.
Yeah. That's really interesting. I mean, there's a lot going on, as you said, and it's sometimes hard to track it and to figure out what things are going to look like in the future. But trucking is so fundamental, and transportation and logistics to everything. So you brought up the pandemic and the whole supply chain issues. So tell me so you said during the pandemic, your business really boomed as well, so what do you think is the future? Like, where are we headed in trucking and transportation and logistics?
Yeah, I think like the big question, right? Let's just talk about the elephant in the room. Like, what about self-driving trucks? Like everyone always asks me about self-driving trucks. And there's a great company out there. There's several of them, but Aurora is a great company, which ironically, our software, our legal name is actually Aurora Tech. I got the name Aurora Tech in my heart, and I Googled Aurora Tech, and sure enough, I find Aurora.tech is a self-driving trucking company, and it like blew my mind. And it's my daughter's name, and Aurora actually means like the dawn or the morning, which is where we named our company, our software company, Dawn from. So, but they're a great company, so I think like just to kind of talk about that for a little bit, I think self-driving trucks doesn't necessarily mean unmanned trucks. A lot of times people think self-driving means unmanned, and I think just to put this in perspective is that like our government has a hard time with like a Tesla vehicle without you having your hands on the wheel for 10 seconds at a time. Like I couldn't imagine an 80,000 pound vehicle with hazardous material, especially with given recent events, like not being manned. Like that just sounds a little far-fetched. And when 1 out of every 6 Americans is employed through the trucking industry, like I have a hard time believing that there's some politician that's going to automatically unload like a huge percentage of American jobs of truck drivers that are out there. So do I think that, having totally self-driving unmanned trucks can happen? I mean, I think anything's possible, right? Like I don't want to discount that, but I think that, having self-driving trucks, I think it's going to be appealing for young people moving in because it's going to be more of a tech-enabled space, and it's going to be less about having, driving skills, and it's going to be more about being able to like run efficiently and use some tech things. So I'm excited for that. I'm excited for this new breed of truck driver that's coming out there that can use technology and wants to drive a truck. And it's great for people that have had different histories, people that come in internationally, or maybe they have backgrounds or something like that. Like it's been a great second chance opportunity for people to be able to build really significant incomes for themselves in this space, And then trucking is just not going anywhere. I mean, it's a core industry, right? So I always tell people without trucking, you'd be naked in a field starving because you wouldn't have any clothes, you wouldn't be in a building, and you wouldn't have any food. So like trucking's not going anywhere. It's going to be around for a very long time. And I see things happening more efficiently, like even like as our software comes out and like we have some AI things that we've got in the works where we're going to be able to take market data, driver data, and truck data and find the Goldilocks zone between all three of those to then increase efficiency for, trucking companies. So I think there's a lot of neat stuff. It's so the industry as itself, it's going to be around forever until, they come up with some replacement for trucks. And I think it's just going to become more tech enabled. I think that's the challenge though, is that there's so many monolithic platforms out there that are like big icebergs that are hard. They're like Titanics. They're hard to maneuver. And I think that we're going to start seeing a lot more of these speedboats with microservices out there that, it's not about having this one platform that does everything, but it's about having the platform that integrates with all the other platforms and plays really nicely with all the other people in the playground. And I think those are going to be your big come to market superstars over the next, 5-6 years.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Do you see much change, in automobiles? The other big conversation is around electric vehicles. And, I'm on the Marine Max board. I'm on the board of a company that's a heavy user of fossil fuels as well, which is what trucking is. What's happening with that? The whole fossil fuels debate.
I've got a really good buddy of mine who's actually a startup founder for an EV boat company, and they just built a beautiful boat. They just test drove it on Lake Coeur d'Alene in Idaho, there's actually a lot of crossover with charging these big EV boats, similar to charging semi trucks that's out there, right? So I don't want to talk too much because I actually have some secondary ideas of some projects that I want to work with over the next 24 to 36 months once we get this launched out. But it's like there's just a lot of opportunity, like people can look at what's happening and they can look at like, oh, this is changing and they're losing jobs here and automation there. Or you can look at it as like, man, there's a greenfield opportunity in front of me where we can be the first to market to something that no one's ever been to market on. And that's kind of the approach that I'm taking. I've got 10 years experience, which is more than some, less than others. We made decent money, more than some, less than others. But it's like, man, I feel like, I'm 36 years old. I'm in my prime. I'm like ready to like just take on an industry and just see the opportunity in it.
Yeah, I mean, it's like when of course back in 2020 when we were all hit with the pandemic, we didn't have the choice of whether we were going to deal with it or not. So it was really how we dealt with it, and how we adjusted our sales, as you pointed out, so earlier on. So yeah, it's a lot of it. The same thing's true. There's just a lot of change, but if you look back at the pandemic, so many people that I've interviewed on this podcast really found tremendous opportunity. Certainly, there was a lot of loss, and there's always challenge. With every big change or every big event that changes is like that. But when you look at the companies that came out as winners, they really learned that, how to take advantage of the opportunities that were presented.
And the tough part is you don't feel like a winner when you're in the ring.
Sure.
Like you just feel like a winner when you come out on top, And I
Yeah.
forget who said, I don't know if it was Dave Ramsey or somebody else. A lot of people think that like success is like standing on your goals and your dreams, but really success is just standing on the rubble of all your failures as opposed to standing underneath the rubble of all your failures. And I think that's the big thing. It's like like that gumption, like that stick-to-itiveness, that don't give up and like find a way to pivot, find a way to bootstrap, find a way to do whatever you need to do. That mentality is what's the difference maker between entrepreneurs that are going to make it and entrepreneurs that don't, and it's challenging, right? Sure. Like we've been through challenges. I mean, there's been seasons that we've had to cut personal pay, right? Like I think, and I know there's controversy about recent events, certain CEOs not paying themselves and blah, 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 blah. But it's a real thing. And like, it happens in small businesses as much as it happens in big businesses. And, we've put a lot of money into our software. I think I've personally put over $300,000 into our software over the last several years. And it's like, it's easy for people to look on the outside and make judgment calls about how things are done, but they don't realize like the personal sacrifices that are going to be made. So it's like, this and again, all your audience knows this already. So if you're in the middle of it, just, they say, if you're walking through hell, keep going. Like, don't stop, right? Like, keep on walking, keep on moving, and keep on learning from that, from your opportunities.
Yeah, it's the perseverance or resilience to execute past failure is the way that I describe it.
Look, Dr. White, I want to recommend to you and to your audience right now. I just got done listening to it. It's called The Endurance, and it's about this ship. Have you heard of the ship that tried sailing through the Antarctic in the early 1900s?
Yeah.
It blew my mind. Like when you think about the human will to live and the challenges that a human can face and still survive, I would venture to say there's not one person listening to this podcast right now that has it harder than those individuals. They were stranded for over 400 days in the Antarctic living.
Yeah, they had to walk out, right? Yes.
Yep, they walked for like dozens of miles. They had to take like a 6-person dinghy 600 miles from these two different, insane stuff. And it's like, if they can do that, I can build a successful company.
I think the other remarkable thing about that, if I'm not mistaken, they all made it out.
Every one of them. Even one of the guys had a heart attack, and I thought, no, he died, but he was still alive. Like later on in the chapter, it was like the guy's like, hey, and he was still there nursing his heart attack. 27 men. It was absolutely wild. Yes.
So I think there's a lot of great parallels for leaders of companies as well, because it's like you said, if you found your way into hell, you got to keep walking, and you've also got to get your team through. And I love where this conversation's gone, because I think it's so important, and it's probably not what you were thinking about when you were at that wedding, thinking about how you wanted to do something exciting, but the reality of running your own company and having other people depend on you and having to keep going is pretty tough. And yeah, go ahead.
You almost kind of like, just with my back, you almost become like a pastor or like a counselor or like you kind of become all of those types of things, and you have to be very emotionally aware. Like you have to be able to feel your team. Like you have to be able to feel where people are at. And, you really do have to you have to love people. You have to have compassion on people. And I remember a season not long ago, my UI UX designer, amazing lady, she was selling her home and like building a van, doing this whole van life thing. And it was like, it presented a lot of challenges at that time. And there were some different delays, and me and my CTO were talking like, is she the right fit? Is she going to really stick out? And we just continue to feel in our heart to like give her grace, like give her the opportunity to transition in this lifetime and, in this season of her life. And she had worked for Tech Data. She had worked for small startups. She had worked for all these different companies. And we had to have a tough conversation just about some challenges that we were going through and some changes that we needed to make. And she's like, you know what, Troy, whatever we need to do, I'm 100% on board. I have some of my friends who hate capitalism, but I just tell them that they've never worked for somebody like working for you. And if they worked for people like you, that they would all love capitalism. And I mean, I like almost got that crying. She's like, whatever we need to do, I'm on board. We're in it. And it's amazing. It's, you know, and that's what you do. Like, you're there for your people. And I have some of the most, everything that we've done is not because I've done it, but because I've had the most amazing, I work with some of my best friends that have laid it all out on the line, that have gone above and beyond, and they've worked to build something, not just to have a job. And as a leader, if you can do that as a leader, if you can get people to, it starts with you loving people. If you can genuinely love people and be driven by love with your people, they'll fall in love with you, and you'll develop a loyalty that goes way beyond a paycheck, way beyond a challenge, way beyond any of it. And you'll find people that will go through thick and thin with you. And that, to me, is what, aside from money or finances, like, that's what the greatness is like being able to share these war stories with people.
Yeah, yeah. And when you come out on the other side, when you get all 27 people back alive, it's a pretty amazing thing, and the bonds that are built. You know, I was headed down the path of asking you, and I guess I still want to ask you, what do you look for in people when you're building a team? You know, what are the things you look for? Is it skill? Is it character? Is it all of the above? I mean, what's primary for you?
That's such a good question. So I have a personal philosophy that great companies don't attract great people. They just create a platform to people to be the greatest version of themselves. And I think as an owner of a company, if you could focus, I mean, you want good people, don't get me wrong, but I think, like, as a leader, you know, John Maxwell says everything rises and falls on leadership. And as a leader, if you can look at your organization and you can say to yourself, how does my opportunity allow people to be the best version of themselves? Because when people are the best version of themselves, they're working hard. They're not working 40 hours. They're working on a mission. When you can allow, they're working on something that develops them as their personal character, on their personal goals. And we constantly tell people, like, as a leader, I'm relating people's today work to their tomorrow vision. Even if today's work is not always what they're going to be doing. Like, I have no problem. Like, some people are with us for a season and some people are with us for a reason. And it's like, you have to allow that. And as an owner of a company, you have to be sensitive to that and realize that's okay. Like, some people, we've had people with us for a few weeks that wasn't good, but we had a profound impact in their life. I mean, just the craziest things, people's family dying, or just different things. I mean, you can imagine, I mean, you know how it works, you know? And it's like, some people are there for you for a season and some people are there for you for a reason. And I think it's like looking about it less about, like, hey, what can I get from this person? And more like, what can I give to this person? And if, as a leader, you will have that heart attitude to your team, it's the law of reciprocity. It's the law of sowing and reaping. When you pour into other people and help them become better versions of themselves, there is this magnetic pull to be part of what you're doing, and it allows people to live out their full season with you. And when it does come time to go for them, it's going to be on a good note, not on a bad note, because of that investment that you've mutually put into each other. Yeah. So I would say, is like, you know, to sum that up, it's like, look for somebody that you feel like you can make as equal or more of an impact in their life that they can have in you and your opportunity. And if you'll look at it that way, you'll do amazing things with your team.
Yeah, that's great advice. I love that. So, optimism is also really important for entrepreneurs, and you demonstrate a lot of humility and a lot of I think passion for what you're doing and passion for people. But I'm just really curious, are you as optimistic all the time? And have there been times that you felt like giving up or came close to it? And how did you get past that?
Yeah, I think it's, they say don't make any decisions when you're tired or you're hungry. But I think that the sentiment of it is like, don't make quick decisions, right? Like, know what you're going to do and then do what you know that you're going to do. And, you don't ever want to feel like you gave up too early, right? Like you see all these memes of like the people digging for gold, right? And the one that was just one shovel full away versus the other person that's there. So I think that there's like that stick-to-itiveness that you need to do. And I think, yeah, I mean, we're 10 years now into owning this company, and there's we had a great successes. We've had many different challenges, and like that thought of like, it's not even just like, hey, do I quit? But it's like, is this worth it? Like, is the output worth the reward that I'm getting from this? And then you start to quantify things that are not just money. Again, you start to quantify like the impact that you're having in people's lives, what it's doing in the industry, and all these different things. And one thing that, it says, there's a scripture in the Bible that says that faith is the evidence of things not yet seen. And the reality is whether you're optimistic or whether you're pessimistic, you're exercising a level of faith because you're believing something that's not proven in the natural. So if you have a negative look on the future, you're believing something that hasn't happened. Just like if you have a positive look on the future, you're believing something that hasn't happened. And optimism is like, being in the top of the bunk trying to help somebody up, versus pessimism is like when you're in the bottom of the bunk trying to pull somebody down. Like it's always easier to be negative and pull people down than it is to be optimistic and pull people up. I think, oh man, I'm going to butcher it, but there was a guy who told me the second law of thermodynamics. He says that all things will tend to disarray unless purposefully kept in order. And it's like the idea is like our desk will be messy unless we keep it in order. Like our laundry will be a mess unless we fold it. Our mind in the same way will tend to entropy unless we focus on keeping it tuned to the positive. And, it's like what I say, GIGO, garbage in, garbage out. How does that go? And it's like, you watch your eyes, you watch your ears, you watch what you're putting in, like I don't watch nonsense. I don't listen to nonsense. Like I have restrictions on what I'll watch on my phone and what I do. And there's even things, and like regardless of moral questionability, like they're just not good for your heart. Like they're just not good things for you to be able to do, And it's like focus on those things that are building your person up on the inside, because life on its own is going to have enough negative things throwing at you. That's like, again, back to one of my earliest comments, like I needed to be brainwashed when I got into entrepreneurism. Like I needed to be washed from this idea of working for a company for 40 years to retire off of 40% of what wasn't enough to live off of in the first place. Like I needed to be washed of that, right? And in the same way, like people need to wash their minds with all of the junk that's out there, and they need to stir themselves up, whether that's a list of confessions that they have or meditations that they have. It's people, if for a season it might seem like automatic, like it might seem like it's on repeat for some people, but those are the times where it's good to establish good habits to focus on positive PMA, right? Norman Vincent Peale and all that, wrote, what was it? The Think and Grow Rich, right? I mean, As a Man Thinketh, James Allen, what I think is what it was, right? It's like you have to tend your mind. Your mind is like a garden, and you have to be intentional about it. Even if, and I know there's people thinking right now, especially young guys, right? Maybe some young gals too, but especially young guys, like, nah, man, I'm killing it right now. This is great. I'm dude. Like that, when things are going great, is the time to establish the good habits, because you never know when a storm is going to come. You never know when something is going to change. Everybody in real estate in 2007 thought everything was going to be gravy forever, until all of a sudden it wasn't one more, and they lost everything because of things outside their control. So it's like when things are going great is the best time to be able to start positive mental attitude habits.
Yeah, I love this message, and I really appreciate you sharing it. And in the book I published, a year or so ago, I call it The Practice of Entrepreneurship, because you don't ever perfect it. And yeah. I love that you mentioned good habits, because sometimes it's about showing up, and you've just got to show up, and you try to bring your best game, and you do the best you can, and the next day you show up again.
And you learn
some
from the
days
day
are
before,
good,
right?
And some days aren't. Yeah, so that's all great advice. I always I could talk a lot longer. This has been really great, and
sure.
I'm really excited
awesome. This has been a blast. Thank you so much. I've been smiles this whole time, Dr. White.
Yeah, I love it. There's just so many fun things that we've talked about today, and I was so glad Sarah could join us. That made it even better. But before I go, you've given a lot of great advice, but I always ask for one piece of advice. Like if you could only give one piece of advice to our listeners, knowing that a lot of them are maybe aspiring to run their own business, or maybe they're in the early stages, or maybe they're like you, they're out there trying to make it work. What would that advice be?
Oh my gosh, there's so many different thoughts that I have running in my mind right now. Jeez. I guess the one piece of advice is realizing that there's not one piece of advice that's going to fix your problem.
That's
Like,
great.
don't look for the golden, don't look for the silver bullet, don't look for the snake oil, don't look for that. But the second part of that would be is like give yourself some grace and allow yourself to love the learning process. Like and I remembered this from when I went to college for art and design. Like, art is the process, not the final product. And in entrepreneurship, a lot of time we look at the dollar value, or we look at the revenue, and we use that as the benchmark of success. And it's not. I mean, it is to a degree. It does exemplify some of the reward of the effort that we put in, but it doesn't always. And fall in love with that learning process, realizing that you are the piece of art that's being molded and that's being defined. And if you're in your 20s, your 30s, your 40s, your 50s, I mean, Colonel Sanders wasn't Chicken Man until 55 or 60 or whatever it is, but it's just fall in love with that process of molding yourself and growing yourself and learning what works for you. Maybe you're not a 5 a.m. person. Maybe you're a 1 a.m. person and you're a 9 a.m., whatever. Learn you and focus on molding your life and getting your life in order. And and with that is, it's not just one thing. It's learning you and figuring you out.
Yeah,
I hope that helps. I don't know.
I love that. That's great, because I agree. I mean, you've solved one problem and there'll always be another one. So you've got to be authentic and true to yourself, and it is a learning journey. And I'm excited to hear all that you've learned since we last talked, because it's been amazing. So where can our listeners connect with you, find out more about Brave Freight and what you do?
Yeah, come connect with me on LinkedIn. I've traded Instagram in for LinkedIn this year, except for I got my kid a cotton candy business for his birthday. I bought him a cotton candy machine, so I'm on Instagram a little bit right now. But Instagram's good, at Troy Brave, or LinkedIn. Connect with me on either on LinkedIn or Instagram. So Instagram at Troy Brave, or LinkedIn. You can just Google Troy Brave and find out all the cool stuff we're up to. And I want to say this, Dr. White, is I can't say how amazing enough that the University of Tampa is. They kind of accepted me in as like this adopted child in the entrepreneurship program. And UT was the catalyst for me coming to Embark. This is where I met Logan with Wandersea, and Danielle and Ellery with Fruitful, which is now Wherewithal. And they're the ones that introduced me to Embark. And it was a absolute catalyst to changing how I thought about my business. And it was all because of, and actually it was Tad Savendries and Jonathan Trong with Veripy are the guys that introduced me to the program. So if you're considering being part of the entrepreneurship program at UT, stop considering. Inaction is still in action. Make the decision and be a part of it. Not only is Tampa an amazing, beautiful city and just everything that's happening here, UT is literally second to none, and the entrepreneurship program is phenomenal, and you would only regret not being a part of it. So I just want to recommend your listeners, if they're on the fence of being a part of what you're doing, that they should get off the fence and they should be a part of it, because it's amazing.
Thank you, Troy. Really appreciate that. Thank you for your time. It's been so much fun, and really appreciate those kind words. It was a joy to have you in the program. Thank you. Bye. Bye, Sarah. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Dr. White.
If you enjoyed this episode and would like to learn more about entrepreneurship, we would love it if you hit that subscribe button. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of InFactor.